So what we're going to do tonight, as I promised you, we're going to wind up in Daniel 9 because I want you to really see the 70 weeks. The 70 weeks of Daniel's prophecy is literally a timeline that God gives of how long he's dealing with Israel. Then there's an interruption in that time that's the Gentile era. Paul said that the full time of the Gentiles being saved has got to come to pass. So there's a limit God's given for the Gentiles to operate under the era of grace. And then you have the last 7 years of the last week of Daniel. But we're going to get into that. Probably not tonight, though, because to get to Daniel 9, I need to give you some instruction into the book of Daniel. And really, the book of Daniel, the chapters are not chronological. In other words, you got chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Well, 7 and 8 really transpired right before chapter 6. He gets visions. And then chapter 9, the one on the 70 weeks we're going to go to, that happens after chapter 6. You got to go through the timeline of Babylonian kingship and the rulers of Babylon and when they were overthrown. And the real chronological order of the chapters of Daniel is Daniel 1, 2, 3, 4, then chapters 7 and 8, then chapter 5, which is the handwriting on the wall. You remember that one? Mm-hmm. Then chapter 6, then chapter 9 comes in somewhere right in between there and chapter 6, because chapter 6 is Daniel in the lion's den. And it's a different leader. It's not even a Babylonian. It's a Medo-Persian empire by that time. And if you really go back and begin to understand Daniel was one of the Israelites from the royal family, and you read about this in chapter 1, the nobility, the young men that they didn't have physical defects, they were handsome, they showed aptitude, learning, well-informed, quick to understand. And the king had his people go get those young men out of the captives of Israel to bring them into his court to train them in the way of the Chaldeans. And verse 6 of Daniel 1 says, among those that were chosen from Judea were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And the chief of the Babylonian officials gave them different names, trying to change them. And here's, boy, you got to understand, Daniel and these boys, it is believed, were somewhere between 16 to 19 years of age, possibly as young as 13 when this happened. They were just young men. And here they are being taken in captivity to Babylon. They're being sorted out from all the other captives, and they're being taken to the king's palace. And they're picked out because they have these features about them that just draws these leaders of Babylon to them. But you also got to understand, this is God orchestrating Daniel's life. Daniel and Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah are also known as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Yeah, the three Hebrew boys. And you read about them in Daniel 3. But in Daniel 1, they've been pulled out from among the captives. They've been taken to the king's palace. And the king, for 3 years, they are to be instructed and taught the language, the customs, and the way the government of Babylon operates, because he's going to bring them into his court to work as officials for him. And here's Daniel and these three other guys, we call them the three young Hebrew boys. Here they are among them. When they get into captivity, and Daniel he doesn't want, and you got to think about this. This is a teenager. This is a boy probably not even in his 20s yet. But he's still so committed to his faith and to his God that he tells the one that's over them that the king was giving them a daily portion of the food that was at his table. We're talking good stuff. We're talking wine. We're talking a feast. But Daniel and them did not want to be defiled, they put it. Because they didn't know if this was pork, which they're not allowed to eat. There's some foods that were shellfish they're not allowed to eat, stuff like that. And they didn't want to be touched by the wine. And that probably has a lot to do with being the vow of a Nazarite, because they didn't touch wine. But Daniel didn't want to be defiled, so they went to this guard that is over them, and they said to him, let us eat different. Just give us vegetables and water. And the guard that was over them, he said, I can't do it. My life is on the line. If y'all come out here and don't look as good as these other guys that are eating the good food, and you come up here looking thinner and not as healthy and so on and so on, he said, my life will be on the line for it. And that's when Daniel said, well, test us. Test us. Give us so many days and let us just eat vegetables and drink water, and you see how we look. And at the end of those days that Daniel spoke of, he looked at them and they fared better than all the others. Okay? After that, 3 years transpire. And you got to put this timeline in there when you're studying the book of Daniel, and understand that these aren't just 1, 2, 3, bam, bam, bam events taking place. 3 years transpire, and they now go before King Nebuchadnezzar. You might as well say this is the king of all the world. They go before King Nebuchadnezzar, and when the king looked at them, and he saw that these guys, they had knowledge nobody else seemed to have. And Daniel 1:17 says that God gave them knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature, learning. Daniel could understand visions and dreams. Yep. Yeah. That is going to propel him to the forefront of the Babylonian government before it's over with. And you got to see God is setting all this up. That's okay. You got to see God is setting all this up. Because Daniel is going to get visions of the end time that nobody had ever seen before. We might be able to get into, we won't this semester, because we only got 3 more Wednesday nights after this one. What? Yeah, we got it. We got 8 altogether. And we got 3 more Wednesday nights after this one. But you take Daniel 7 and you go and take it and compare it with Revelation 13, and you will see that Daniel was seeing what was happening in Revelation 13. You go on over into Daniel's prophecies. You go, boy, you get in chapters 8, you get into chapters 10, 11, and 12. You will see where Daniel saw the Antichrist, identified him, and described him in the very same manner that Paul describes him in Thessalonians, and Revelations describes him in Revelation 13. As a matter of fact, the history, the prophecy, I should say, that Daniel gave in chapters 11 and 12 were so accurate that many believe they were historical writings and not prophetic writings. That they were written after they took place hundreds of years later, and somebody pinned Daniel's name to it. That's how accurate they were. Now, we don't have time to get over there and all that tonight. But I want to just take you into this beginning of Daniel and him moving into the position he moves into in this book. Daniel, and of course, chapter 2 I'm going to look at for you for a few minutes tonight. Then you got chapter 3, which is the fiery furnace. 3 Hebrew boys, we know that one well. Mm-hmm. Chapter 4 is the only chapter in the book of Daniel that was not written by Daniel. Chapter 4 is written by Nebuchadnezzar the king himself. And it's interesting to read it, because after he gets this vision we're going to see in chapter 2, it's what propels him in chapter 3 to build this great image that he says everybody's got to bow down to. And the three Hebrew boys who said, we ain't bowing. And he said, well, you're going to burn. They said, that'd be fine, but we ain't bowing. And you know the story, okay? But his ego really got up after what Daniel tells him in chapter 2. And he builds that statue. And in chapter 4, he writes his own story about how he looked out over his kingdom and said, look at what I have accomplished. And he went mad. And you'll read it where he says, God put this on me. They drove me out of my throne. They drove me from my kingdom. And he said, I was like a wild animal out in the woods for years until my sanity came back to me. And he said, then when my sanity came back, he said, I praised the Most High God. And I believe, now it's just coward theology, but I believe Nebuchadnezzar will be in heaven because of his acceptance of Jehovah and recognizing him as who he was, as God. But that's what chapter 4 does. Then chapter 5, Nebuchadnezzar's gone. His grandson, Belshazzar, is on the throne. And this is a grandson. His grandson is just as arrogant as his grandfather was at one point. And you know the story of chapter 4 where he goes and gets all the sacred vessels that were taken out of the temple of God. And he brings them into this great feast. And he starts drinking out of them. And he's praising the gods of gold and of silver and of brass. And about that time a hand appears on the wall and starts writing. And he calls in all his astrologers and magicians, and none of them can read it because it's written in the Babylonian language, but they don't know what it means. Tekay, Michelle, Tefirson, something like that. Anyway, so the king's grandmother or mother says, there's one in your kingdom that can do this. And she tells him about Daniel, who's also known as Belteshazzar. Well, he calls Daniel in. And he said, I'll give you all this gold. I'll give you this, that. And Daniel's already been raised to a great high position now. He don't need no more promotion. But he's telling him all he's going to give him if he can read it. Daniel said, you can keep the gifts to yourself. He said, see, Daniel read the handwriting and he knew the kingdom was going to fall that night. When you read the end of chapter 5, you read where it would tell you that night Belshazzar was killed. And the kingdom went to the Medes and the Persians. Then you come in to the prophecies in 7 and 8. You have 4 beasts in Daniel 7. Daniel sees the 4 great kingdoms of the world, all the way to the kingdom of the Antichrist, from Nebuchadnezzar to the kingdom of the Antichrist. The first 3 he describes, and he uses a combination of earthly beasts. He sees a leopard with wings on its back, and so on. A bear raises itself up on one side, got iron teeth, and got ribs in its mouth, and so on. But the fourth kingdom could not be described by any combination of earthly beasts. The fourth kingdom, he said, it was so great and terrible, and it crushed. Well, he's talking about the Roman kingdom, but he's also talking about the Antichrist's kingdom. And then you get over in chapter 8, and it'll continue on with other visions doing the very same thing. But let me just to show you Daniel and where he ends, why he ends up where he does in this kingdom. Daniel, and before I get there, when we get to Daniel chapter 9 and the 70 weeks that I'm wanting to get you to, Daniel has been in Babylonian captivity somewhere around 67 years by Daniel 9. And Daniel is anywhere from 85 to 90 years old. Daniel knows he will never leave Babylon. He knows he's never getting out of there. But he's also, and I'm getting ahead of myself, he's also been reading the book of Jeremiah. And he read where Jeremiah said this captivity is going to last for 70 years. Now here's a little interesting point I want to get to you before I get to Daniel 2. The reason God sent Israel into Babylonian captivity for 70 years is because they owed him 70 Sabbath years. God, when God brought the Israelites into the promised land, He told them, He said, I'm going to bless you. He said, you're going to till the land. And in the 6th year, He said, I'm going to give you such a bumper crop that you take the 7th year off and you let the land rest in the 7th year. Now think about this. What if your employer told you, work for me for 6 years and I'll give you a vacation the 7th year and pay you? I'd take that. That's what God was telling them. He even went so far as to tell them that I'm going to give you such a crop in the 6th year that you won't till the ground of the 7th year. In the 8th year, the 8 is the number of new beginnings. In the 8th year, you're going to plant and sow. He said, but you're still going to be eating from the crop of the 6th year. And by the time you start reaping the harvest in the 9th year, you'll still have crop from the 6th year. That's how blessed I'm going to bless you. But for 490 years, they still tilled the ground every 7th year. So they owed God 70 Sabbath years. He sent them in the Babylonian captivity to reclaim His 70 Sabbath years. And that's how long they were in Babylonian captivity. And it's interesting, and I'm still trying to tie the two together, but that is the length of time of Daniel's 70 weeks, 490 years. Same thing. 490 years. That's why I'm telling you, you got 6 days of creation, then you got the 7th day, which was the Sabbath day of rest. A day is as 1,000 years, 1,000 years is as a day. There's 6 days God has given man and given earth, and man and the earth together. 6 days He's given them. The 7th day, the 7,000th year belongs to God. He's going to get His Sabbath millennial. Just like He got His Sabbath years out of Israel when He put them in the Babylonian captivity. So, here's the setting. Daniel and them are sent into this Babylonian captivity. And they're sent in there because of what Israel has done for 490 years, stealing the Sabbath from God. Now, this is God putting Daniel and them in place and in position. This is just remarkable. So that even when they're in captivity, God is still orchestrating everything about Israel. He's orchestrating everything about their future. The scripture in Jeremiah 29:11, we all love it, don't we? I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord. Plans to prosper you, not to harm you, to give you hope and to give you a future. It is the verse right before that where God told them, I'm putting you in captivity for 70 years. And I'm doing it because you owe me 70 years of the Sabbath. But I know the plans I have for you. Plans to prosper you, not to harm you, to give you hope in the future. When God sends them, and boy, I can really get on a rabbit trail here, because you're talking about obeying the rest of God. You're talking about giving the land the rest that God ordered the land to have. Entering into the rest of God. And I don't know if y'all remember this when I was at Live Oak, but I did a series on entering into the rest of God. And it comes out of Hebrews, where the writer of Hebrews said, I swore on my oath and in my anger they would not enter into my rest. He said, and then you go in the next chapter, he said, but now we have entered into that rest. And it's the same rest of God that God gave Israel when He brought them out of Egypt. He promised them, you go in, I'll put you in the promised land, and as long as you obey me and do what I say, I'll give you rest in that land. He told me, I'll give you rest from the enemy. Your enemies will be at rest around you. They won't mess with you. All you got to do is do what I tell you to do in that promised land. And I don't have time to get in this, but it's the same thing in our life. The writer of Hebrews said that we enter into that rest. Therefore, we do not labor. We have labored to enter into that rest, but now that we're into that rest, he said we cease from our labors. You don't have to try to make things happen. God will make it take place around you because you exist in His rest. Anyway. That's a whole nother, well, I'll teach that one semester. They enter in this captivity, and God gives Daniel and them great promotions. You can read it in verse 18 of chapter 1. It said, at the end of the time set by the king to bring them into service, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters and the whole king. Can you imagine this? These boys are having to work side by side with magicians. You might as well call them witches. I mean, they're having to work side by side with them. They're having to mingle with them. And yet they keep themselves so pure. So pure and away from all of that. It tells you can be in the world. And that's Jesus' prayer in John 17. Father, I don't pray you take them out of the world. He said, I pray you keep them from the world. See? That, beloved, is a great promise for these last days also. I told you that a week ago, I talked to you the last 2 weeks about wrath and tribulation, and we're not appointed unto wrath. But there is going to be tribulation that's going to come on us. We can still live in the midst of all of this and still not be contaminated by it. Doesn't mean we're not going to be affected by it. You're affected by it when the prices go up because the economy does what it does. I mean, we're affected by the world. These boys are living right there in the darkest place there is to live, Babylon. They're having to do their daily work in the government next to these magicians and these enchanters. Now, 3 years have gone by, and the king promotes them, puts them in position. Verse 21 said, Daniel remained there until the first year of King Cyrus. That's a long way off. That's after Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar, Darius, the king of Persia. This is Cyrus, the one that follows him. That's how long Daniel stays there. And it's telling you, Daniel remained there in that position until Cyrus. Now watch what happens in chapter 2. And I don't have time to really read all of this. But it says, in the second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His mind was troubled. He could not sleep. And the king summoned the magicians, enchanters, and astrologers and called them in. And long story short, he's had a dream. Whether he can remember even what he dreamed or not is debated, but he whatever he dreamed, it just troubled him. It troubled him so to the point and place that he couldn't sleep at night. He finally sends out and he calls in the astrologers, the enchanters, the sorcerers, all these guys that Daniel and them hang out with. And he said, I had a dream and I want you to tell me what it means. And these guys look back at him and they just go, tell us the dream, we'll give you interpretation. You know, that's like going to the fortune teller and say, tell me who I am and I'll believe you. You know. They couldn't tell him. And they said, oh, king, live forever. Tell your servants a dream and we'll interpret it. He said, I've decided, and this is verse number 5. He said, I've decided that if you don't tell me what I dream and tell me the interpret of it, he said, I'm going to cut you all to pieces. I'm going to turn your houses into piles of rubble if you don't tell me this. He said, but if you do tell me, he said, I'm going to give you great gifts and rewards and honors. Just tell me the dream, interpret it. And they came back and they said, let the king tell his servants the dream and we'll interpret it. And they're buying time again. And the king knows this. And the king said to them in verse 8, he said, I'm certain that you're trying to gain time. You reckon? He said, I'm certain you're trying to gain time because you realize this is what I firmly decided. And when they couldn't tell him, the astrologers looked at him and said, there's no one on earth who can do what the king asked. He said, what the king asked is too difficult. And this is verse 11. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods, and they don't live among humans. Guess who's about to show up? When the king heard this, he got so angry, he set orders out. We wanted all of the wise men of Babylon executed, and this included Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. This included those three also. And when the commander of the king's guard went out to put them to death, when he got to Daniel, the Bible said Daniel spoke to him with wisdom and tact. And Daniel said, why was this decree issued so harshly? And the guy explained to him what was going on. And Daniel says, give me time with the king. Let me go to the king. He said, and I'll ask him to give me time to interpret this. And he did. And the king gave him time to interpret the dream. Daniel returned to his house. He explains the matter. He's apparently living with Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He goes back and he tells them, boys, we got to pray. We've got to pray. And I hope to get to the place I can show you what the Daniel fast is all about, because that's over in the latter chapters of the book of Daniel. But they said, we've got to pray. And they prayed and they asked God. And then during the night, God gives Daniel the interpretation. He gives him the dream and the interpretation of it. And this, I want to read you Daniel's prayer and praise, and then we're going to move on. Daniel says, praise be to the name of our God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. Watch, he changes times and seasons. And Daniel's realizing something. Daniel's realizing there's more to him being in Babylon than just a captivity. He knows why they're there. He's read the book of Jeremiah. He studied it as a young man. He knows why they're there. That's why he refers to it in chapter 9. And it says, I was reading Jeremiah, and I saw where this captivity was supposed to end in 70 years, and they were like 3 years away from it then. And he's going, I want to know what's going to happen next. Well, he's asking that because at this point in his life, he's realizing God's put him there for a reason. God's put him there to intervene literally in history itself. This is just remarkable. He's put him there to change the course of Babylon, to change the course of the king of Babylon. And he says, pray be to God, he changes times and seasons. Watch this. He deposes kings and raises up others. He already sees it. He's seeing there's going to be a downfall. Matter of fact, what he's seeing, he knows there's going to be 4 kingdoms that are going to come up in the world. 4 major world powers. He's going to show it in just a minute. But he knows he ain't going to live that long. But he's speaking prophetically, and he's saying, God, I'm telling you folks, and you have to believe this. At least I do. Nobody goes into the office of these world powers, and especially the President of the United States, except God puts them in there. Mm-hmm. I don't care who they are. Mm-hmm. They don't get in there except God allows it to be that way. Mm-hmm. Whether you like them, you don't like them, you vote for them, you don't vote for them, it doesn't really matter. Even Nebuchadnezzar, you read this in chapter 4 at the very end, he says the same thing. God raises up and puts down. God's in charge. That's why people get so frustrated with politics these days. Preachers get to ranting and raving about politics these days and who's in power. And, God can't be in that, The very fact God is. Nobody gets in these positions except God puts them there. And God puts them there because he's going to fulfill his will through them. He even said that through Pharaoh. He prophesied to Pharaoh. The psalmist David said in the Psalms, God said, I have raised Pharaoh up for this moment. He said, it is through him I've raised him up to be who he is, to do what he's done. And you've got to see that even in the politics today, in the world governments today. Do not sit back and wonder, is God in control? My God is always in control. He's always in control. He is absolutely sovereign, and nothing happens in this earth that God's not allowing it, that God's not taking it and using it for his will. It's what he means in Romans when he says in all things God works for your good. I've seen it in my life. When I messed up, God still worked for my good. He corrects you, and you get corrected, but He uses it for His good. You know, anyway, let me get into this. He changes times of season. He deposes kings, raises up. He gives wisdom to the wise, knowledge to the discerning. He reveals deep and hidden things. Boy, Daniel's beginning to realize what he's there for. He's beginning to realize what God is going to do with him. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness, and light dwells with him. John said it in one of his first letters. He said, God is light, and in Him there is no darkness at all. Daniel's seeing that. He's saying he knows what lies. Just because it's dark don't mean God don't know what's going on. He knows what lies in the dark. Light dwells with him. And Daniel said, I thank you and praise you, God, of my ancestors. You've given me wisdom and power. You've made known to me what we asked of you. You've made known to us the dream of the king. And now, that's when Daniel goes and tells him, don't execute the wise men. Take me to the king. I'll interpret his dream. And he goes in. And Daniel, verse 26, then the king asked Daniel, are you able to tell me what I saw in my dream and interpret it? Listen to Daniel. No wise man, enchanter, magician, or diviner can explain to the king the mystery he's asked about. Look at what Daniel's doing. Daniel's looking at him. This is Daniel 2:27. Daniel's looking at him and he's saying, no man can do what you're asking. But watch his next words. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, secrets, mysteries and secrets. And he goes on and starts telling the king what he saw. Here, he said, here's the dream you had when you were lying on your bed. Your mind turned to things to come. The revealer of mystery, secrets, the King James says, showed you what's going to happen. He said, as for me, this mystery has been revealed to me, not because I have greater wisdom than anyone alive. He said, it's not that I'm smarter than anybody else, but he said, God's using me so that your majesty may know the interpretation of this dream and what was in your mind. Now here's what he saw. And you can read this when you get home and go down there and read this. He tells him, you saw a statue. You saw this great statue. The appearance of it was awesome. And he said the head of the statue was made of pure gold. Pure gold, the head. The chest and the arms were of silver. The belly and the thighs were bronze. The legs were iron. Notice what's happening here. And the feet, part of clay, part of iron, part of baked clay. You have to really watch this now. It starts out with the most precious of metals, gold. And from there it starts going down. Gold, silver, bronze, iron. And then the very bottom, the feet, are part iron and part clay. And what you're seeing is there's a deterioration in the fineness of the metal, but there is a strengthening in the ability of the metal. Iron is much stronger than bronze or silver. Gold's not even strong. You can damage gold so easily by just striking it. You can scar it. A piece of iron, you can't. Yeah. So what you're seeing is the kingdoms are going to degrade in their splendor, but they're going to increase in their strength and their ability to rule. Now watch now. You get down to the very bottom of this, and he says, and he tells them, after he shows them all the different, he says, then the iron, the clay, the bronze, and this is verse 35, and the silver and the gold were all broken to pieces. And it's because, verse 34, a rock was cut out, but not by human hands, and it struck the statue on his feet of iron and clay and smashed them. Here he comes. He says, a rock, not cut out by the hands of man, smashed this feet of the last kingdom, smash it, and cracks them to pieces, And then that rock becomes a mountain and fills the whole earth. Well, what's he talking about? The kingdom of Christ. The thing we've been, from the very beginning of this study, back in the fall of the year, we're talking about the day of the Lord, where Christ comes to set his kingdom up on the earth. His kingdom fills the whole earth, subdues all the other kingdoms. That is the very thing he's talking about when he talks about this stone not cut out, this rock cut out that strikes the statue on its feet. Now, when he gets through telling him what he saw, he looks at him and he says, "You're the king." And listen to what he calls him. "You are the King of Kings." I only hear that one other time in Scripture. But Daniel's giving him the honor that's due him, that the way God saw Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar was going to be the greatest Gentile, not king of Israel. There's only one king of Israel. That's Christ himself. Even David, the greatest man king of Israel, born of a man, a king of Israel. Even David said, "The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right feet until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet." David said, "The Lord said to my Lord." David said, "I may be king, but I've got a Lord over me." But Daniel says, no, there's coming one. And he tells him, he said, "King, you're the gold head. God's given you a dominion, given you power and glory." He said, in your hands he's placed all mankind, even the beasts of the field, the birds of the air, the sky, wherever they live. You are that head of gold. Boy, that's got to feed his ego. That's got to just really get to Nebuchadnezzar. And that's why, and we won't get there, and I won't go over there and study, but that's why the next chapter, he builds that great image. The only thing is, he makes the whole image of gold. That image, when you read it in the next chapter, that image that he wanted the 3 Hebrew children to bow down to was 10 stories tall. Wow. 10 stories tall. It could be seen from miles away on the plain of Babylon where it was placed. You imagine what it undertook for him to build a statue like that and cover it in gold and be that tall. But that wasn't, that kind of wealth was nothing to them back then. Nothing to them. Well, what do you think it is to our king? His streets are paved with gold. They're not paved with it. His streets are pure gold. You think about that. My goodness. Anyway. He looks at him and he says, "You are that king." And he said, and God's raising you up. He said, "But after you, another kingdom will arise, and it's going to be inferior to yours." And he's talking about that Medo-Persian Empire. That's the one that comes in Daniel 5 at the handwriting on the wall. When Belshazzar thinks the kingdom is safe in his hands, that night, the kingdom is taken. Literally, the Medo-Persians invaded. Do you know how they invaded Babylon? Babylon had this huge wall going around it. It had a river running through it that fed it, all its fresh water. The Medes and the Persians dammed up that river and marched under the wall. Went under the wall. While Daniel is sitting there telling Belshazzar what the handwriting on the wall meant, the Medo-Persian Empire is sneaking in under the wall and coming in and going to kill Belshazzar and take over the kingdom. He's the next one. And when you get over to Daniel chapter 7, he's the second beast that you see, the Medo-Persian Empire. Now, I'm telling you, you'll get yourself all bumfuzzled, confused trying to put all this together until you just sit down and lay it out. And lay it out and see what it really does. But listen to what he goes on and says. He says, next there will be a third kingdom, a bronze, that will rule over the whole earth. This is Alexander the Great, the Grecian Empire. This is the Grecian Empire. And you'll see this in our little outline right here. That the head is Babylon, the chest and the arms of silver, Medo-Persian, the belly and the thighs of brass are the Grecian Empire. And this is the Grecian Empire that comes in next. This Grecian Empire, this is the one where Cyrus is king over Babylon now. And he really likes old Daniel. And Daniel's still got a high position. But there's other people in position around Daniel that don't like him. So they go and feed the king's ego. King, we think you ought to make an order. Nobody's allowed to pray to anybody but you for the next 30 days. King likes it. Well, he said if they do, they need to be thrown in the lion's den. And you know the story. And there's the lion's den with Daniel. Do you think Daniel's even bothered for a minute? I mean, he's already seen years ago from that. He saw the 3 Hebrew boys walk into a fiery furnace and come out of there not even singed with smoke. You think he's worried about lions? But it's showing you. It's showing you what he's seeing here. And it's the world kingdoms. It's the world kingdoms that Daniel is getting to see. Daniel is literally seeing the future. In his visions and dreams and in this statue, he's seeing it all the way down to our day and time and Christ coming to set his kingdom up on the earth. He's seeing all the 4 major kingdoms that are going to rule the world. When we get to Daniel 9, you're going to see that parentheses in the time frame that is the church age. I got it on the little chart here. You got that parentheses of the church age. Where's my chart, Michael? I've got one somewhere. You go. There it is. You got the parentheses of the church age right here. And we'll get into that. But that's the hour of grace. That's the hour of grace. And that's where the last kingdom's going to rise up. And I ain't got time to do all this. When you get in chapter 11 and 12, you will see the 3.5 years again. The 3.5 years that the Antichrist will rule. Daniel predicts it will be 3.5 years. Same thing as the book of Revelation predicts it. This is how accurate this book is. But watch this now. Watch this. He says to him, and after that 3rd kingdom, he said, and finally there will be a 4th kingdom, strong as iron. Iron breaks and smashes everything. As iron breaks those things to pieces, so it'll crush and break all those. That was the Roman Empire. And just as you saw the feet and toes partly baked clay and partly iron, this is going to be a divided kingdom. Now, what it's telling you is this kingdom, the last kingdom, is going to be part of a democracy and part of a tyrannical ruler. It's going to have a mixture, clay and iron. It's going to show that, you know how the Antichrist is going to rule. We've already looked at that some. Revelation 13. No man might buy, sell, trade, whatever, except he take the mark of the beast. And he's got to make it so the whole world does that. So there's your clay and your iron trying to rule, but you got part of the democracy in there, to where you have governments like the United States and others that want to be a democracy, and we try to push it around. It doesn't mix. It doesn't mix. One's going to try and be in control. But then he tells him, but at the end, in the time of those kings, and there's 10 toes, Daniel goes farther in Daniel 7, and he sees the 10 horns, and he sees a little horn coming up out of the 10 horns. The little horn is none other than the Antichrist that will come out of those 10 toes, out of that kingdom. See, and this is where, and you would have had to study prophecy back in the early 80s and times like that everybody thought the European Common Market, the 10 countries of the European Common Market, were going to be the kingdom out of which the Antichrist came. And they even set up, and I was telling Joyce this, when they went to the euro dollar, when they tried to combine all the currencies of those 10 countries and bring them in under the euro dollar. You go to Europe, you've been over there if you've been in the military, you know the euro dollar. Everybody thought, well, here comes the one world currency, No. We're seeing now that it ain't even going to be currency. It's digital. It's digital funds, digital money. Anyway. Daniel's seeing this, and he's seeing it coming. But watch what he says in verse 44. He says, in the times of those kings, the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven, will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed. This is verse 44, chapter 2. Nor will it be left to another people. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it itself will endure forever. And this is the meaning of the vision and of the rock cut out of the mountain, not by human hands, a rock that broke the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold. And he said, the great God has shown the king what will take place in the future. And the dream and its interpretation is trustworthy. And when Nebuchadnezzar heard that, you just got to understand, he falls on his face before Daniel. Kings don't do that. Kings don't do that. They don't get low before somebody else. But this king prostrates himself before Daniel. Literally lays on the floor before Daniel. Because he knows that's what he dreamed. And he knows that's what he saw. And now Daniel's telling the interpretation of it. And this king just falls on his face right in the presence of Daniel himself. And you and I just don't understand the significance of this Hebrew boy. This Hebrew boy in his 20s now, in the Babylonian government. And the king of Babylon falls on his face before him and honors him. And honors him. Because what Daniel showed him, and we won't get into chapter 7 and 8 because I want to get into Daniel 9 with you later on. But in chapter 7 and 8, you need to go home and read it. Read chapter 7 and 8, and then go read chapter 5. Read the chronological order I gave you, the chapters. And you're going to better understand what was happening in Babylon, why it was happening with Daniel, and why it was taking place the way that it was. God is literally setting everything in. I'm just telling you, I'm sitting here in myself, and I'm seeing that God, this was over 2,000 years ago, that God had already set everything in place. He's already set everything in place that's in place today. It's what I'm telling you. You can't let what's happening in the world powers today, in the government today, even in the economy today, you can't let fear dictate your thoughts, dictate your hearts, dictate your minds, dictate what you see and what you believe. You've got to know God is absolutely sovereign and in control of everything that's transpiring in the earth. He's been doing this. Well, he's been doing this since man was put on the earth. But the revealing of these four major world powers and history absolutely verifies everything Daniel saw, from the Babylonian kingdom to the Medo-Persian kingdom to the Grecian kingdom to the Roman Empire was the empire that was in place when Jesus was on the earth. It was the Roman Empire that destroyed Jerusalem when Jesus told them, said, not one stone will be left here upon another. In 70 AD, 70 years after Christ, Titus, the Roman general, comes out of Rome and besieges Jerusalem. And a bunch of the Israelites went to Megiddo. If you're going to Israel, if you ever go to Israel, they'll take you to Megiddo, which was a plateau south of Jerusalem, where a band of Jews held out for, I forget how long it was, held out against the Roman government because they couldn't get up there to them. And they had to wait till they build this huge ramp, and part of it's still there to get up to those Jews. And none of the Jews would let themselves be captured alive by the Roman Empire. They made a pact, and they went around and they took the life of each one until there was only one left. And only one Jew was left alive. And the reason they know that story is because a mother took her children and went and hid in a cistern cave, a cave that held water, and hid till it was all over with. And when they finally captured it, they brought her out, and she told them the story of what they did and how the Israelites held out on Megiddo. And then finally, every one of them had their lives taken by another Jew so they wouldn't be captured by the Roman government. Rome literally was conquering the world. Conquering the world. And then, don't have time to get into this, Roman Catholicism coming alive. Peter supposed to be the first pope of the church, on and on and on. Rome still exists through the church. The last kingdom The last kingdom will be the kingdom of the Antichrist. Where's the Antichrist coming from? I can't tell you, folks. People are trying to predict it. People are trying to say where he's coming from. My God, they thought Henry Kissinger was going to be the Antichrist. Some thought Anwar Sadat was going to be the Antichrist because him and Jimmy Carter and Menachem Begin did the Israeli Peace Accord, the first peace agreement between Egypt and Israel in modern time. And they thought Anwar Sadat would be the Antichrist because he brought peace. But then Anwar Sadat was murdered. One of the men that was involved in the murder of Anwar Sadat went to prison for it, but got out of prison and became one of the right-hand men of Osama bin Laden. See, we just don't have time to break it all down, but what you're seeing is God has set up all these kingdoms. He set it up to this day and time. He set it up to this moment that we're living in. You and I cannot allow what goes. Why do you think Jesus said you're going to hear wars and rumors of wars? See that you be not troubled. All these things must come to pass. The end is not yet. Nation's going to rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. And he said you're going to have to endure some stuff. But and that's what I'm trying to teach you in so many other lessons. You got to endure through all this. Our time is coming. Our time is coming. There is going to be a rapture. And I'm getting a little different opinion on it now. I'm going to tell you about that later on in the lesson. Next week, I'm going to take you into Daniel's 70 weeks. I'm going to take you into Daniel 9. Please just go home and read Daniel. Just read Daniel. Read it in the chronological order that I've given you. Read Daniel. But when you get to Daniel 9, look at this chart. Look at the outline I've given you. And you're going to see where we're headed. You're going to see what Daniel saw. You're going to see the pinpoint accuracy of the 70 weeks of prophecy up to Christ himself coming into Jerusalem. All right? I got to let you go. They got to go get their children as always. They're always our time clock stopping us. Which is good. You got to let me find an ending place.